There's a concept in psychology often used in therapy known as systematic desensitization. And what it means is that you systematically desensitize yourself to something you're afraid of. So if someone's afraid of spiders, for example, you got to systematically desensitize them to that fear. You might start by just having them look at images of spiders or watching videos of spiders, eventually being in the same room as a spider, eventually holding a spider, eventually putting a spider on their face. And all of this systematically desensitizes them. It adapts them to their fear to a point where they eventually no longer fear it, and they no longer have all of the inflated actual fears or thoughts about spiders. They start to realize it's not that big a deal. The reason we all have fears in general is because we don't know what the outcomes or the consequences are going to be on the other side of that behavior. You may have inflated fears about what's going to happen if you, for example, quit your job to start a company, or to start putting content online, or to asking that girl on a date, or to asking your boss for a raise. Whatever you're afraid of, the reason is because you think that there are downsides to actually trying that. And so you're afraid to attempt it because you don't know what's going to happen. And according to prospect theory and other research from Daniel Kahneman, all people inflate the fear of loss. We're more afraid of loss than we are of gain, actually. Losing hurts more than gaining. And so if you're afraid of something, it's because you think if you try it, you may actually lose something. And again, according to prospect theory, you probably inflate those potential losses enormously. Now, what happens when you actually do what's called fear testing, where you actually test your fears? It's just like going to the gym. You've got to go to the gym to strengthen your muscles, and you've got to actually pump weight. Eventually, you can actually lift way more weight than your former self, and the same thing is true of fear. If you avoid fear all the time, then it's kind of like you can barely lift 5-pound weights of fear. But if you actually fear test or fear train, eventually you can face 100-pound fear experiences or 1,000-pound fear experiences. It's all internal. It's all your ability and your confidence ability to know that what's on the other side of your fear is the development of skills, capabilities, and confidence. And so what you do is you fear test, you fear train regularly. If there's something you're afraid of that's towards your future self that you want to try it. Actually, what the research shows as well in psychology is that the anticipation of an event is always way worse or way more potent than the event itself. Our imaginations are intense, and so we dread or we come up with all sorts of worst case scenarios, and the fear itself is what's actually scary. Fear is more scary than the actual potential events. We're so afraid of fear that we avoid it at all costs. You can train your fears in small ways by trying low stakes things which really won't have that big of repercussions, such as, for example, asking for a mentorship or whatever it is that's a low stakes thing that still you have a little bit of resistance towards. You immediately try it. And here's what happens is once you actually attempt the behavior and you get to the other side of that fear, you get to the other side and you realize this. The downsides that you were imagining or inflating are usually not nearly as bad as you thought. Once you get to the other side, whether you fail or whether you failed the situation or whether things didn't work out, it wasn't that bad. In fact, it's kind of like asking your boss for a raise. Someone might wait for months and months to do that. They may go in there and ask their boss for a raise. It's a 10-minute conversation. They either get rejected or they get accepted, but either way, it really wasn't that bad. And then once you're on that other side, now that you are more clear on the fact that it wasn't that bad, now you're more clear towards your future. So Dan Sullivan actually has a 4-step model. He calls it his 4 C's formula. And he says whenever you want something new, you first have to start with commitment. Commitment then leads to courage. So you're committing to something that maybe scares you. Then commitment leads to courage, which is that you're trying something outside your comfort zone or outside your knowledge base. And that's where a lot of the fear is the fear of the unknown, fear of uncertainty, fear of not knowing what's going to happen. Plus you inflate the outcomes that you think are going to be terrible. Once you actually start attempting it, you start realizing it's not that bad. And that's where you start to develop new capability and confidence. So just for example, imagine someone who's terrified of driving and they don't know how to drive. They may come up with all of these scary stories in their mind about why driving is scary, or thinking about all the worst case scenarios. A person who's afraid of flying as well, or a person who's afraid of starting a business, or a person who's afraid of anything. They don't understand it, and so they create all sorts of worst case scenarios in their mind. Well, there's a 4-stage model of learning that's been developed. The first stage is actually called unconscious incompetence. What that means is that you're unconscious of your own incompetence. So that would be the person who actually is unaware of even driving in general. They don't see the value of it. They're unaware that they can't even do it. They don't even want it. This would be of someone who's even completely ignorant of the fact that driving is a possibility. Well, the second one would be conscious incompetence, where someone starts to become aware that driving is a thing and that they could actually do it and they could develop the skills. So they're aware of their own incompetence. They're consciously incompetent and they start to actually desire it and they start to think about it and learn a little bit, dabble their foot a little bit. Well, that leads to the third stage, which is conscious competence. That comes through a great deal of trial and error learning, or what psychologists would call deliberate practice. Now you can actually drive, but you have to be really conscious of it. You got to think about it. The fourth stage is what's called unconscious incompetence. And that's where now it's just, you can do it unconsciously. It's become your new norm. You've integrated it into your system. You can do it without thinking about it, driving without thinking about it. You're no longer afraid of it. And you can actually, it's just a part of who you are. Well, your future self is unconsciously incompetent about things that you're somewhere else on that scale on. You may be radically ignorant of things that your future self is completely skilled at. You may not be good at money, or good at running a business, or good at being in a relationship, or good at handling whatever it is. Or you might start becoming consciously incompetent about things you want for your future self. You're aware of things that you want for your future self, but you're aware of your own ignorance. You're aware of your own incompetence. And then you start going through the process of trying it. Well, the only way to get there is to systematically desensitize yourself to the things you're afraid of and the things you don't know. You've got to actually become aware of what you're not ignorant of. There's a great quote actually that says, you cannot read the label from inside the jar. So you actually have to go out of the jar, which means you got to courageously face the uncertainty. And what happens is you realize is that it's not as bad as you thought. You can handle it. And once you're outside your knowledge or your comfort zone and you start to navigate it, you start to develop capability and confidence that your future self will have, that your current self doesn't have. So those are the 4 C's actually from Dan Sullivan. Commitment leads to courage, leads to the development of capability, which ultimately leads to confidence. And confidence is really your ability to know that you can handle what's on the other side of fear. You don't know what's on the other side of it. So if you exercise some courage and try something you're afraid of, you know you can figure it out. Even if things start to fall apart, even if there are some little negative repercussions, you can pull it together, you can fix it, and you can move forward. And so you start to take massive, courageous action, and that ultimately builds increasing capability and confidence that whatever happens, the downsides aren't going to be as bad as you're imagining, so you might as well just move forward. And whatever's on the other side, you're going to be able to figure it out. That's confidence. And so the more you do that, the more you desensitize yourself to your fears to the point where you're no longer lifting 5-pound weights of fear, you're lifting 50-ton weights. And you can take a huge amount of fear, get on the other side of it, and have very potent peak experiences. One of my favorite quotes comes from the American author Sterling Sill, and he said that the most extraordinary lives obviously have the most extraordinary experiences. Well, if you're avoiding your fear, you're probably not having extraordinary experiences. You're probably just repeating the day-to-day. So if you want to have extraordinary experiences, you got to have peak experiences. You got to act courageously and intentionally and expose yourself to a new way of living. And as you have more and more peak experiences and extraordinary experiences, your life becomes more extraordinary. You start to have a new normal that then becomes just your normal way of living, which is radically above and beyond your current self. So my invitation, my challenge to you is to start fear testing, to start desensitizing yourself to your fear, to start testing what's on the other side of that fear and realizing it's not as bad as you thought, and then lifting heavier weights of fear and realizing you can handle what's on the other side of that fear, because most people, because they're not going to test their fears and expound that muscle, their potential becomes very limited to whatever is safe to them, whatever's in their comfort zone. But if you become willing to try all sorts of things that most people won't do or try, now all of a sudden the world becomes your oyster. Now all of a sudden you've got options that are unavailable to 90% of people because they just simply wouldn't even dare try. And once you get on the other side, you realize it's not that bad. You can figure it out. You can adjust to it. I remember when I first started investing money, my advisor told me, just set a number and just let it go on autopilot. A certain number goes out of your bank account. And he told me to set a number that it was a little scarier than I thought. And so I did it. I just set a number that was a little scarier than I thought. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make it. And what's happened is my income immediately grew because my income adjusted to what I was doing, because we all have a baseline desire of what is our security blanket. And so because I was now putting that money towards my future self in the form of investing, I started finding ways to increase my income. So that's really what happens is as you set new targets and as you go outside your comfort zone, you start to adjust your ability subconsciously to adapt to your new level is very quick. And so I kept adjusting up outside my comfort zone and watched myself quickly adapt to that. And so you can quickly adapt to the level of your behavior and to the level of your goals and to the level of the systems you set. And you want those to be a little outside your comfort zone so that you're forced to adapt. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. So hope that helped. I invite you to do a lot more fear testing, a lot more fear lifting, a lot more systematic desensitization. And as you do, you're going to be able to build enormously more confidence and flexibility and create faster outcomes than if you're just going to sit in your comfort zone. Please like this video if it helped. Please subscribe to the channel. Also down below, you can get access for free to my 30-day Future Self course, which will train you how to become your desired future self faster. Have an amazing day.